Welcome, dear listener, to a collection of stories spun from the delicate pages of the Whispering Light. Each tale held within this enchanted tome was lovingly crafted by the gentle hand of Queen Simone, the kind-hearted ruler of the Kingdom of Tranquil Dreams. Her words are a soothing melody, a balm for restless hearts, and a guiding light through the wonders of imagination. So, let your mind drift, and your heart be light, for what you are about to hear is no ordinary story. It is a gift, passed down through the ages, meant to bring joy, laughter, and a touch of magic to all who listen. This tale is called The Clockmaker's Children. In a quiet town nestled at the base of a sprawling mountain range, there was a small, unassuming workshop that many passed by without a second glance. Though weathered with age, the sign above the door still bore the name, Arnold's Clockworks. Arnold, the man behind the name, was a master of his craft, an aging clockmaker with hands as steady as time itself. His creations weren't just clocks, they were intricate works of art, each one a perfect balance of gears, springs, and tiny movements. But Arnold's most outstanding achievement wasn't found within the ticking heart of any timepiece. It was in his adopted children, Maurice and Rebecca. Maurice, now 17, was steadily coming to possess his father's skillful hands and meticulous mind. He was always in the workshop, leaning over the latest clock repair, asking Arnold endless questions about the intricacies of each piece. His mind was filled with curiosity and wonder, eager to understand how time worked, both in the clocks they built and the world around them. 2 years younger, Rebecca was just as curious but in her own way. While Maurice saw the world through precision and logic, Rebecca saw it through the lens of imagination. Her fingers might not have been as steady as her father's and brothers, but they wove stories with every stroke of the pen, filling notebooks with tales of adventure and magic. Their father, Arnold, was a quiet, thoughtful man who adored his children. Though his hands were worn from years of clockmaking, his love for Maurice and Rebecca was timeless. He often worked late into the night, the soft ticking of clocks surrounding him as he tinkered with gears and springs, creating something new. One evening, the town bell tolled, signaling the end of another day. Maurice and Rebecca sat at the workbench with their father, finishing up the day's repairs. The evening light filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow across the room. As they worked, Arnold spoke in his usual quiet tone. You know, there's more to a clock than just its parts. A clock is like life. It's not just the gears and springs that make it work. It's the way they fit together, the way they move in harmony. Maurice nodded thoughtfully, but Rebecca tilted her head, intrigued. What do you mean, Papa? Arnold smiled, his eyes soft with affection. Each part has a role to play, no matter how small. A single gear might seem insignificant, but without it, the entire clock stops. It's the same with people. We're all part of something bigger. We each have a role to play. Rebecca's brow furrowed in thought. So, we're all like little gears. In a way, yes, Arnold replied. And sometimes, even the smallest gear can make the biggest difference. As the evening wore on, the family fell into a comfortable rhythm, each lost in their own thoughts as they worked. The soft ticking of clocks filled the air, a soothing reminder of time's constant presence. But time, like the gears of a clock, is not always predictable. And for the clockmaker's children, the gears of fate were about to turn in ways they could never have imagined. That night, after the family had finished their dinner and the house was quiet, Maurice and Rebecca sat by the fire while their father continued his work in the shop. With her legs curled beneath her, Rebecca scribbled in her notebook, the tip of her quill scratching the parchment as she created her latest tale. Maurice, ever the meticulous one, leaned over the small clock he had been working on all day, making careful adjustments to the gears. Do you think Papa will ever let us take over the shop? Rebecca asked, not looking up from her writing. Maurice glanced at her, his brow furrowed in thought. Maybe one day, when we're ready. He's not the kind to hand it over unless he's sure we can handle it. You know how meticulous Papa is. Rebecca sighed, leaning back against the chair. I don't know if I'd ever want to take over the shop. I love helping. And the shop is cool and all. But I can't see myself spending all day elbow deep in clock gears. I think I'd rather spend my time writing stories. Maurice smiled. Well, that's what makes us different, I guess. You're good with words. I'm good with gears. Before Rebecca could reply, the faint sound of footsteps came from outside. The siblings shared a look. It was late, and the streets were usually empty by this hour. A knock at the door echoed through the quiet house, making them both jump slightly. Maurice stood and walked cautiously to the door, his heart quickening. He opened it a crack, peeking out to see who would be calling at such an hour. Standing on the doorstep was a man cloaked in a long, dark coat. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, and a heavy, leather-bound book was tucked under one arm. Behind him, the street was dark and empty, the lamplight flickering in the distance. "Good evening," the man said, his voice low and rasping. "I seek the Clockmaker." Maurice hesitated, his instincts telling him there was something off about the man, but he nodded slowly. "My father is working in the back. Can I take a message?" The man's lips curled into a faint smile, though no warmth existed. "No message," he replied. "I'll wait." Maurice reluctantly stepped aside, allowing the man to enter the shop. The stranger moved with a deliberate slowness, his eyes sweeping over the walls lined with clocks as he made his way toward the back room where Arnold worked. Now, on her feet, Rebecca watched the stranger with a wary expression. She whispered to Maurice, "Who is he?" "I don't know," Maurice replied, his voice barely audible. "But I don't like this." They followed the man from a distance, their footsteps silent on the wooden floor. When they reached the back of the shop, they found their father standing behind his workbench, his hands hovering over the intricate gears of a clock he had been repairing. Arnold looked up at the man, his expression unreadable. "May I help you, sir?" Arnold asked, his voice calm but cautious. The stranger placed the leather-bound book on the workbench with a heavy thud. "I require your skill," he said, his voice still low and rasping. "There is a clock that must be fixed, one far more intricate than anything you've ever worked on." Arnold's eyes flicked to the book, then back to the man. "What kind of clock?" The stranger's smile widened, though it still lacked any warmth. "Not a clock of metal and gears, Clockmaker. A clock of time itself." The room fell into an eerie silence. Maurice and Rebecca exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the man's words pressing down on them like the gathering of storm clouds. "A clock of time," Arnold repeated, his tone filled with skepticism. "I'm afraid I don't understand." The stranger tapped the cover of the book with one gloved hand. "This," he said, "is no ordinary timepiece. It tracks not the hours of the day but the threads of fate. And it is broken." Arnold's brow furrowed deeply, his experienced hands slowly reaching for the book as if drawn to it by some unseen force. "And what happens if this clock remains broken?" he asked. The stranger's gaze darkened, his voice turning ominous. "Time will unravel, and with it, the lives of those you hold dear." Rebecca's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. She stepped forward, her curiosity momentarily overcoming her fear. "What do you mean?" The man's eyes flicked to her, and for the briefest moment, a flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, passed across his face. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Every life is a thread," the man explained, his voice taking on a softer, more melodic tone. "And every thread is woven into the grand tapestry of time. But when the clock is broken, the threads begin to fray. Lives are cut short. Paths are altered. The world itself begins to fall apart." Arnold's hands paused, hovering over the book. He looked up at the man, his face pale. "And you want me to fix this timepiece?" The stranger nodded. "You are the only one who can." Arnold hesitated, his hands still hovering above the book. The weight of the stranger's words hung heavily in the air, filling the workshop with an unspoken tension. Maurice and Rebecca could feel it, too, a quiet unease settling into their bones. "Why me?" Arnold finally asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. "Why not someone else? There are other clockmakers, surely more skilled than I." The stranger tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes narrowing. "Because this task requires more than skill, Arnold. It requires a heart that understands the passage of time, a soul that respects its delicate balance." He gestured to the clocks lining the walls. "You, of all people, know that every tick, every tack, is more than just the movement of gears. It's life itself, moving forward, second by second." Rebecca watched her father closely, noticing the way his fingers trembled as they reached for the book's cover. Maurice stepped closer, sensing the weight of the moment. Arnold's fingertips brushed the leather, and as soon as they made contact, the air in the room seemed to change. A low hum filled the space, subtle but constant, like the gentle ticking of an unseen clock. The stranger's smile grew, but there was still no warmth in it. "This book," the stranger said, his voice almost a whisper now, "contains the instructions you will need. But be warned, Clockmaker, this is no ordinary task. The clock you are to repair exists beyond our world, beyond what your eyes can see." Arnold's gaze flicked up to meet the man's eyes, confusion and fear mingling in his expression. "What do you mean?" The clock you will repair binds time itself. Its pieces are scattered, hidden, and must be found before they can be mended. And once you begin, there is no turning back. Maurice felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Papa, maybe you shouldn't. But before he could finish his sentence, the stranger turned abruptly and headed for the door, his coat billowing behind him as if moved by an unseen wind. Wait! Arnold called after him, but the man was already gone, disappearing into the misty night as though he had never been there at all. The room fell silent, the hum fading away, leaving only the soft ticking of the clocks around them. Arnold stood frozen for a moment, staring at the door where the stranger had just been. Papa? Rebecca's voice was soft, hesitant. Arnold turned toward his children, his eyes clouded with worry. I don't know what just happened, he admitted quietly, but it seems we've been given a task. And it sounds like it's one we can't refuse. Maurice's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. The stranger's words echoed in his head. Time will unravel. Lives will be cut short. The world will fall apart. Do you really think this is something we should be involved in? Maurice asked, his voice thick with concern. Arnold let out a long sigh, rubbing a hand over his weary face. I don't know, son. But we can't ignore it. If what he says is true, then this is bigger than all of us. And if I'm the one who can fix it, I don't have a choice. Rebecca, always more impulsive than her brother, stepped forward. Then we'll help you, Papa. Whatever this clock is, wherever it's hidden, we'll find it together. Maurice stared at his sister, his brow furrowing. Rebecca, we don't even know where to start. This could be dangerous. It's always dangerous when the world's falling apart, she replied with a determined gleam in her eye. But we can't just sit here and do nothing. Arnold looked between his children, pride and fear warring in his chest. He didn't want to put them in harm's way, but he knew Rebecca was right. They couldn't ignore the stranger's warning. All right, Arnold said, at last, his voice steady. We'll do this together. But first, we need to understand what we're dealing with. He reached for the book, flipping open the cover. The pages were filled with strange symbols, diagrams of intricate gears, and celestial patterns, all woven together in a design that seemed to move on its own. The longer they stared at the pages, the more the symbols seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, as though the book were alive. This is incredible, Arnold whispered. I've never seen anything like it. Rebecca leaned over the book, her eyes wide with fascination. It's like the clock is hidden in plain sight. Maurice, on the other hand, felt a growing sense of dread. There was something wrong about the way the pages moved, the way the words seemed to shift just out of reach, as though they were hiding something. Papa, this feels wrong, he said quietly. Like we're not supposed to see this. Arnold didn't respond, focusing entirely on the pages before him. As he turned the next page, a soft glow began to emanate from the book, casting the room in a pale, ethereal light. Rebecca gasped. What's happening? Before anyone could answer, the glow intensified, wrapping around them like a cocoon. The walls of the workshop seemed to blur and shift, and the ticking of the clocks grew louder and faster until it was deafening. Then, with a sudden jolt, everything went silent. When the light faded, they were no longer in the workshop. When the light dimmed, and the blinding glow receded, Arnold, Maurice, and Rebecca found themselves standing on solid ground, though it wasn't the familiar wooden floor of their workshop. Instead, they were in a vast, endless field of tall, silver grass that swayed gently in the breeze, catching the light of the twin moons hanging low in the sky. Where are we? Rebecca breathed, her voice barely more than a whisper. She spun slowly, taking in the surreal landscape. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The stars above were unfamiliar, and the air itself seemed to hum with a faint, otherworldly energy. Arnold clutched the book tightly to his chest, his mind racing to make sense of their sudden shift. This must be one of the places tied to the clock, he said, his voice laced with both awe and confusion. The book. It must have transported us here. Always more practical, Maurice bent down and ran his hand through the strange grass. It shimmered beneath his fingers, soft but cool, as if made of liquid silver. This is impossible, he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. What the heck is going on? None of this makes any sense. Rebecca took a step forward, her heart pounding with excitement rather than fear. But it's incredible. Look at it. We're not in the workshop anymore, Maurice. We're in another world. Before Maurice could reply, there was a distant sound, like the chiming of bells. It echoed across the silver fields, drawing their attention to the horizon. Far in the distance, barely visible in the pale moonlight, was a towering structure that gleamed in the dark, an enormous clock tower. "There," Arnold said, pointing toward the tower. "That's where we need to go." As they began their journey across the field, the ticking of unseen clocks grew louder with each step, reverberating as if time was pulsing around them. The ground beneath their feet shifted subtly, and the horizon seemed to stretch and shrink, playing tricks on their eyes. Maurice kept glancing back at the tower, which never seemed to get closer, no matter how far they walked. "We're not making any progress," he said, his frustration growing. "It's like we're walking in circles." Rebecca paused, looking up at the twin moons. "Maybe we're not supposed to walk straight there," she suggested, her brow furrowed in thought. "What if the clock isn't just a place we can reach? What if it's testing us?" Arnold, though exhausted, nodded slowly. The book did say this wouldn't be a straightforward task. Perhaps we're meant to solve something before we can reach the tower. He opened the book again, scanning the shifting symbols on the page. As he turned the next page, a new diagram appeared, showing a labyrinthine pattern that resembled the field they were standing in. "It's a puzzle," Arnold murmured. "The tower is at the center, but we must follow the right path to get there." Maurice groaned. "Great. A puzzle. Just what we needed." But Rebecca was already excited, her mind working quickly. "Look at the way the stars are positioned," she said, pointing upward. "I think the constellations are guiding us. If we follow their pattern, we might be able to break through the maze." Arnold and Maurice exchanged glances, but they knew better than to doubt Rebecca's intuition. With her guidance, they adjusted their course, no longer walking directly toward the tower but weaving through the field in a seemingly random pattern. And, to their surprise, the clock tower began to grow closer. As they approached the base of the clock tower, its immense size became even more intimidating. The structure stretched high into the sky, its enormous face ticking away with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The sound was deep and resonant, filling the air like the heartbeat of the world itself. Arnold led the way toward the entrance, a massive set of bronze doors adorned with intricate engravings of stars, moons, and gears. Maurice and Rebecca flanked him, their earlier excitement tempered by the growing sense of unease that hung over them. "This is it," Arnold said quietly, his eyes fixed on the doors. "The clock we've been sent to repair." Rebecca glanced up at the tower's face, her heart racing. "It feels alive." Maurice placed a hand on the cool metal of the door, feeling a strange energy pulse beneath his fingers. "Whatever's in there, it's powerful." The bronze doors swung open with a low groan, revealing the dimly lit interior of the tower. The walls were lined with intricate gears, spinning silently in perfect harmony. The floor beneath their feet was a mosaic of polished stone, each tile depicting a different phase of the moon. Arnold led them inside, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of awe and trepidation. An enormous clock mechanism in the center of the room stood, its gears turning slowly, methodically. But something was wrong. One of the gears, large and central to the whole mechanism, was cracked, its jagged edges barely holding together. "This is the broken piece," Arnold said softly, stepping forward to examine it. "This is what we need to fix." Maurice and Rebecca moved to stand beside him, their eyes wide as they took in the sheer scale of the machine. The broken gear was as large as the workshop back home, its metal surface gleaming in the soft light. "How do we even begin to fix something like this?" Maurice asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Arnold reached into his toolkit, pulling out a set of delicate instruments. "We start with what we know," he said. "It's still a clock. It's just much larger." Rebecca's eyes wandered over the other gears, following the rhythm of their movement. She noticed that the rest of the clock was still working despite the broken piece, but there was tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. "We're running out of time," she whispered. "I can feel it." Arnold didn't reply, his focus entirely on the task at hand. He worked meticulously, his hands moving with the precision of someone who had spent his entire life repairing clocks. But as he adjusted the cracked gear, something shifted in the air, a low, ominous hum that reverberated through the tower. Maurice's heart skipped a beat. "Papa, hurry." "I'm trying," Arnold muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as he worked faster. "This gear is more fragile than I thought. If I don't do this just right." Rebecca stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the cracked gear. "What if we can't fix it?" Arnold didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her he shared the same fear. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and the gears around them began to slow. The ticking of the clock face above them faltered, the rhythm breaking for the first time since they had entered the tower. "We're losing time," Maurice said, panic creeping into his voice. It's breaking down." Arnold gritted his teeth, making one final adjustment to the gear. The moment his tool left the metal, the entire mechanism shuddered violently, and for a brief second, everything stopped. The ticking, the gears, and even the air itself seemed to freeze in place. Then, the broken gear snapped back into place with a loud clang, and the entire machine roared to life. The gears spun faster, the clock's face resumed its ticking, and the hum faded away, replaced by a steady, calming rhythm. Arnold stepped back, his hands shaking with relief. "It's done," he breathed. Maurice and Rebecca stared at the clock, their hearts still racing from the tension of the moment. "We did it," Rebecca said, her voice filled with awe. But as they stood there, catching their breath, a low and melodic voice echoed through the tower. "You've repaired the clock, but time is still fragile. Be careful, Clockmaker. You've only just begun." Arnold turned toward the source of the voice, but no one was there. The tower was empty, save for the clock's ticking and the gear's steady hum. "Who said that?" Maurice asked, his eyes wide with confusion. "I don't know," Arnold replied, his brow furrowed. "But I have a feeling this isn't over." As the family returned to their workshop, the strange clock tower fading from their memories like a distant dream, they couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Time itself felt different, more delicate, more precious. Arnold continued his work as a clockmaker, but now, whenever he adjusted a gear or replaced a spring, he felt the task's weight more keenly. He understood now, more than ever, that time was not just a mechanical construct. It was a living, breathing force, and it was his job to keep it running smoothly. Maurice and Rebecca, too, felt the change. Maurice worked alongside his father with renewed purpose, his hands steady and sure as he repaired the clocks in their shop. Rebecca, ever the storyteller, began weaving tales of time and destiny, her words carrying a new depth of understanding. Though the stranger never returned, his words lingered in their minds, a constant reminder that time was fragile and the clockmaker's work was never truly done. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Whispering Light. I hope it brought a smile to your heart and a bit of wonder to your day. If you enjoyed the story and would like to journey with us through more enchanting adventures, please consider subscribing, clicking the bell icon for notifications, and hitting the like button. That way, you'll never miss a new chapter from Queen Simone's cherished collection. And if this story touched you, I invite you to leave a comment or share it with someone who could use a little more joy and magic in their life. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with light and laughter.